The first time Aram Qureshi heard the proposal, the world did not shatter loudly. It shattered quietly, like glass cracking under sunlight. He had spent years building a life out of broken pieces, holding his little daughter's hand through hospital corridors, eviction notices, and long afternoons when hope felt like a luxury. Now, his boss stood in front of him with a request so absurd, so impossible that, for a moment, he wondered if this was another cruel test from fate. Pretend to be her husband for 1 year, for business, for inheritance, for survival. And as the weight of those words settled in, one unspoken question burned in his chest about what that would mean for two strangers living under one roof. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that happen in ordinary daylight, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Deep Night Stories. Your support keeps these stories alive for hearts that need them most. Aram was not a man who dreamed anymore. At 32, he was a single father to 5-year-old Mir, a bright-eyed child with hair that never stayed tied and questions that never seemed to end. Her laughter was the only reason he still stood tall. 2 years earlier, he had buried his wife after a sudden illness that drained their savings and left him with debts that clung like shadows. Since then, he worked as an operations manager at a rising architecture firm in the heart of the city. The office overlooked busy streets flooded with sunlight each morning, but Aram often felt like he lived behind tinted glass, watching life instead of living it. His boss, Sarah Rahmani, was known in the industry as a visionary. She was sharp, composed, always dressed in soft pastel suits that contrasted with her fierce determination. She had inherited the firm from her grandfather, but was still battling the board members who doubted her leadership, right? The rumor around the office was that a clause in her grandfather's will required her to be married within the year to retain controlling shares of the company. It was the kind of outdated condition that felt unreal in modern times, yet it loomed over her like a deadline ticking louder each day. Syra had observed Aram long before she called him into her sunlit office that morning. She saw how he left exactly at 5 to pick up his daughter from kindergarten, how he brought homemade lunch instead of joining gossip sessions, how he quietly helped colleagues without seeking credit. She knew he was reliable, and reliability was what she needed most. The proposal was simple on paper: a legal marriage for 1 year, public appearances together, a shared address, a stable family image to silence the board and secure investor confidence. In return, she would clear his debts, increase his salary, and ensure Mir's education was fully funded. It was not romance she offered. It was a contract wrapped in necessity. Aram walked home that day beneath a bright afternoon sky that felt too cheerful for the storm inside him. Mihir ran toward him at the gate of their modest rented house, her tiny shoes slapping against the pavement. She threw herself into his arms, and for a moment the world narrowed to the smell of baby shampoo and crayons. He wondered what kind of father agreed to marry for convenience. He wondered what kind of future he was securing for her. The decision did not come easily. Pride battled practicality. But when he reviewed his overdue bills that night and thought about the landlord's warning about Mihir's school fees due next month, he realized that love alone could not pay for stability. He agreed with conditions of his own. Mihir's well-being would come first. Boundaries would be respected. This would remain a partnership, not a performance that confused his child. The wedding was small and discreet, held during a warm weekday morning in a simple ceremony attended by only a few witnesses. Sunlight filtered through tall windows as signatures were placed on official documents. There were no flowers, no music, no promises whispered with trembling hands. Yet when Mir held Syra's fingers and smiled shyly, something unexpected flickered in the room. Not love, not yet, but possibility. Moving into Syra's spacious house felt like stepping into another world. The home was filled with clean lines, white walls, and large windows that welcomed golden daylight. For Mihir, it was magical. She ran from room to room, marveling at the staircase and the small garden where butterflies hovered over blooming marigolds. Syra watched her with an expression that softened the sharp edges she wore at work. Aram insisted on sleeping in the guest room, unwilling to blur lines that were already fragile. Syra agreed, relieved by his respect. They established routines. Breakfasts were shared in the bright kitchen, where Mir would chatter about her drawings. Afternoons were spent at work, where they maintained professional composure. Evenings often found them seated across from each other at the dining table, discussing schedules like business partners. But life has a way of sneaking emotion into carefully controlled spaces. One Saturday afternoon, when Mihir fell while riding her new bicycle in the garden, it was Syra who rushed forward first, kneeling on the grass without hesitation. She cleaned the scraped knee gently, her voice calm and steady. Aram saw something in her then that no board meeting could reveal. He saw tenderness. Slowly, the house began to feel less like a stage and more like a home. Syra started leaving work earlier to join them for afternoon tea in the garden. She learned how to braid Mihir's hair, though unevenly at first. Aram noticed the way she smiled when Mihir called her by name with affection instead of formality, so he began to see cracks in Syra's armor, hints of loneliness she had buried under ambition. At work, whispers circulated. Some employees speculated about the sudden marriage, but the results were undeniable. Investors regained confidence. The board's resistance weakened. Syra's leadership flourished, backed by the image of a stable family. Arham supported her not only publicly but strategically, offering insights that strengthened the company's operations. Their partnership became seamless, yet the true transformation unfolded in quiet daytime moments. One bright morning, as sunlight poured across the living room floor, Syra found Arham asleep on the couch, with Mihir curled against him, both exhausted after a long week. She stood there longer than necessary, absorbing the sight. She realized she had never known such warmth in her carefully curated life. Arham, too, began to struggle with unfamiliar emotions. He admired Syra's resilience, the way she balanced power and vulnerability. He caught himself looking forward to their shared breakfasts, to the comfortable silence that no longer felt forced. The contract that once seemed purely transactional now carried emotional risk. The turning point came unexpectedly. Mihir fell ill with a high fever one afternoon. Arham panicked, memories of hospital corridors flooding back. Syra cancelled an important meeting with hesitation and drove them to the pediatrician herself. She stayed by Mihir's bedside that night, pressing cool cloths against her forehead while Arham fought tears he refused to shed. In the soft glow of a bedside lamp, fear dissolved the last of their pretenses. They were not acting. They were a family in crisis, united by concern. When Mihir recovered, something unspoken had shifted. The guest room felt unnecessary. Conversations grew deeper, touching on childhood memories, regrets, and dreams long abandoned. Syra confessed her fear of never being enough for her grandfather's legacy. Arham shared the guilt he carried for not saving his wife. In daylight honesty, they found healing. As months passed, and the year that once felt like a countdown began to feel like borrowed time slipping away too quickly, the board officially confirmed Syra's permanent control of the company. The clause had been satisfied. Legally, nothing bound them beyond the contract's expiration date approaching. One afternoon in early spring, with sunlight dancing through newly blossomed trees in the garden, Arham realized he dreaded the end of the agreement. The house echoed with Mihir's laughter as she chased butterflies, unaware that her world might soon change again. The thought of packing bags and returning to a smaller life felt like tearing roots from soil that had finally nurtured them. Syra felt it too. The idea of waking up to an empty kitchen, of coming home to silence after board meetings, unsettled her more than any business risk ever had. She had entered the arrangement seeking control, but love had quietly written the terms. They did not need dramatic confessions. The understanding unfolded in a simple daytime conversation on the garden bench while Mihir painted nearby. They acknowledged that what began as necessity had grown into something genuine, not perfect, not without T-scars, but real. As the contractual year came to an end, they chose not to dissolve the marriage. Instead, they renewed it with intention rather than obligation. There was no grand ceremony, just a shared promise under the open sky that this time they were choosing each other freely. Mihir, now healthier and happier than ever, became the brightest witness to their transformation. The house that once felt staged now pulsed with authentic joy. Morning sunlight no longer symbolized exposure but hope. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Stories like these survive because people like you believe in them. And before we close, I have a special request. Comment the word hope if you believe that love can grow in the most unexpected places. Arham once thought his life had ended in a hospital corridor. Syra once believed power was the only shield against loneliness. Together, in ordinary daylight filled with school runs, shared meals, and quiet laughter, they discovered that second chances are rarely loud. They arrive gently disguised as difficult choices, waiting for courage to welcome them. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most unusual beginnings lead to the most sincere endings. And in a world that often rushes past kindness, choosing to stay, to care, and to love deliberately may be the bravest decision of all.